Now the story of a World Wide Web that connected everything, and the one YouTuber who had no choice but to keep it all apart. It's spoiler, I hardly. Spoiler warning for everything that has come out in House of the Dragon so far, so that's the first 2 seasons and the half season that we now have out. I have not read Fire and Blood, the book that House of the Dragon is based on. I'm recording this the day after I watched the episode, just hopping in with a few things I liked off the top about this episode before I then get into the bingo. Number 1, to kick off the episode, I loved the intro, seeing as we get further into it how everything is being consumed by fire, particularly of course now that we get the new scene of Aegon and Sunfire, with Sunfire's return and Aegon's quote-unquote resurrection, seeing them burned all over, was fantastic to see. I loved kicking off the episode with the argument between Rhaenyra and Baelor. Baelor finally starting to get to have a voice towards the end of the season and just making a lot of good points. It was a really clear demonstration for me of how Rhaenyra is going downhill. Usually I record all this stuff before I check out the social media response to the episode, so it's my own pure understood thoughts. However, I do have to point out one thing I saw online, which is absolutely killing me, which is that we know that Daemon, does not care about the dragon seeds. There's no way he keeps up with the details of their life. Ergo, it wouldn't shock me if he isn't even clear on if Hugh has a wife, let alone what Hugh's wife's name is. So when he's in the middle of a battle and he sees Hugh and he's like, Hugh, you're not supposed to, he's thinking to himself, Hugh, you're not supposed to be here. You're supposed to be guarding the capital. And Hugh is just screaming, cat, cat. I don't think Daemon is like, oh, this guy is deserted to go look for his wife. I have higher priorities. I just don't think Daemon can make any sense at all of why Hugh is standing in the middle of this battle screaming about cats. Speaking of the dragon seeds, the final thing I wanted to say before launching into the episode is I really like that Ulf, even after his defection, when he is drunk and bragging about himself, he still styles himself as Ulf the White. It feels like such a smart writing choice, because we see when he's first being knighted that he declares, I'm Sir Ulf Targaryen, and they tell him no. So he goes with the next best option, which is he looks at their hair and he's like, okay, I'm the white, I'm just kind of copying it off them. It's a trait that they have instead of getting to embrace what's cool about me. And it's funny to me now that not only is he associating himself with a colour that's obviously usually linked to moral purity, like how the cloaks of the King's Guard are meant to be the purest white and their armour shines white and blah blah blah. Also funny because you've defected from their side. You don't have to do this anymore. You can just call yourself Ulf Targaryen. Ormond won't be happy about that, but what's he going to do to stop you? I'm sure he'd concede it in the negotiations. And Ulf still lacks the vision, lacks the imagination to even step up and say, I am Ulf Targaryen. I am the true Targaryen now. He's still going with this kind of knockoff name. I just think that's funny. I think it speaks to Ulf as this chaos agent who has no grand game plan, is in a disastrous position at the end of the episode, having ruined everything for everyone, is a horrible person. But it's just Ulf. It's still just Ulf. He has not become a grand Machiavellian player on the board. It's just Ulf doing Ulf things. On last week's episode, I made it to bingo, defined for my purposes as a row, diagonal, or column crossed off, aka nothing like what real bingo is. And so because I've already achieved my goal for this season, I figure I've given myself a minute to talk about something behind the curtain before I get to whether we made it to double bingo or even triple bingo with this finale, and my thoughts on this finale. My real world thing is, if you can ever hear the rustling in the back of my videos, that's the sound that the blanket makes as I shuffle around, because I throw a blanket over my computer and microphone when I'm recording in order to try to dampen the reverb and improve the sound quality. And the reason that this is my second attempt at recording this is because I decided, like a genius, to try throwing a different, lighter cover over me for recording today, and I tried a picnic blanket, which sounded great for all of 2 minutes until I was reminded rudely that picnic blankets tend to pick up things that you picnic with, like dust and grass and all manner of things from the outdoors. So there's your lesson for today. Don't go outside and enjoy beautiful nature. Make sure to stay inside and argue with people on the internet about whether the greens or blacks are more morally just. Bingo. House words. No. Dead Targaryen. yes, but not in a flashback or vision. R.I.P. If there's anything I could have changed about this episode, sure, it would have been I would have liked Helena to live and to see her in a 4th season. I understand this is probably the sort of thing that was already determined from the books, so what can you really do about it? You know, my argument might be, yeah, she's under lock and key, you know, like, she isn't going to interact with many other characters, but then that kind of becomes an argument for letting her fall out of the plot because you have a lot of other things going on to dedicate time to, and this is an important step as it is for Rhaenyra obviously going downhill in this season and in particular in this episode. Valerian Dagger, no. Happy Pride Month, Westeros. 2 things to mention here. Number 1, last episode I completely overlooked Jane Aaron's paramour, so that was a, you know, double crossover for that. Secondly, this episode, again, if we're talking about things that would be my nice to haves that they don't really have the time or space for on the show, so it's very understandable to drop, I think especially given that like Rhaenyra is literally being played by a trans actor, it would be very interesting to get further into the idea of the I am the prince that is promised in terms of having a character who's already a fair bit outside societal norms of how someone perceived as a woman should behave, is getting it in her head of, well, all the old prophecies talk about a prince, and I guess I have to be that prince, you know, just exploring that kind of angle that I don't think that's what they're going to be doing with season 4, and no doubt it would, you know, necessitate a lot more arguing on the internet back and forth, but I think that would be a very interesting spin on prophecy and how characters interpret it and shape themselves within it that we haven't seen before. Aemon LARPs as Daemon. None of that in this episode, but this is the one case where I'm going to grant myself leave to go back through the season and revise something I didn't previously see, because, you know, in each particular episode I was like not really seeing a turning point, but in hindsight, looking back on the whole season, I mean, he literally goes to Harrenhal and does the exact Daemon thing where he sleeps in the same bed and has the same dreams and the same conversation with Alice. Yes, obviously Aemond is getting the full Daemon experience, so I tick this one off and I accomplish double bingo on the row in my made-up game. Essos appears. No, and I don't think anyone's making it to it for the rest of the show. Even though Mysaria has been shipped off to Pentos, I doubt she's going to be happy to just head off there. Dragons die. Interestingly, to my immense surprise, we made it through this entire season with only a single dragon death. I mean, granted, I have no idea what state Tessarion is in, and Ulf's dragon, I wish I knew the names of all the dragons, is in extreme danger right now, given what it just did. But where we end off, only Jaceres' dragon, again, would love if I could remember the name. Vermax? Yeah, it was Vermax. Has died in this season. Westerosi history. Well, Rhaenyra does give her whole lecture in her speech, which I'm sure the common people really appreciate. Ship sink? No. The Kotsk reference? No. Kristen's dead. Laris? There is no Laris in this episode. What a pity, but very understandable. Sweet Home Valyria. Ulf gets in some good jokes about that in this episode. Dragon does something suicidal. I think you can argue Ulf's dragon obeying Ulf's orders in this episode is just instantly suicidal. Like, it goes from having a pretty good gig to being number 1 most wanted in the entire realm, having alienated absolutely everyone. Avengers Endgame. Yes, we got the grand battle of the Northerners and the Riverlanders and Daemon's forces from the capital versus the Hightowers, and also Ulf in the mix. You know, it was a real huge crossover event of a finale, as it were. Otto dealt with, Heads dealt with, Cat. Oh, rest in peace. You just kind of got dragged into this war and became just another casualty. Yeah, that's a shame. Backstabbed. The finale is literally called Treasons at Tumbleton, putting aside the betrayal that's already happened of Alicent poisoning her own son in the last episode. Literally just Ulf betraying first his own side and then Ormond would already automatically be enough to put us over the line. But on top of that, Mysaria pretty blatantly breaks from Rhaenyra by leaking, critical information and pushing a fundamentally anti-Rhaenyra agenda towards Helena. And Gwaine completely betrays Ormond in order to try to make peace. So there are betrayals all over the place in this episode. Grand Maester Orwell conspires. No, well, made it through the whole season as a very chill guy, and having adjusted to that, I'm happy if that ends up being his role in the 4th season, that he really is just taking a back seat and observing what's going on with the other characters. Aegon, no, he is more back than ever. Oh my god, the Aegon comeback narrative is so exciting. Peaceful retirement. Yeah, no one in the show is getting a peaceful retirement. Oh my god. Like, Alicent could walk away from it all at this point, but oh my god. And I mean, ditto goes for Azaria, but again, I think these people have too much personal engagement on what's going on to back out now. Night in full play, moot point. Rhaenyra and Alicent, no. 4 weddings and or funerals. We did not get to see a single wedding and or funeral. We didn't even really get to see a proper anointment / coronation. They just murder the High Septon, and then she gives a speech and then walks away, which is not very smart, but here we are. For once, instead of just going off the cuff, I've actually assembled a set of notes on my thoughts on the episode. What have I got here? Ormond. Ormond was built up to be the big villain this season, and I do think the particular choice for him to go and actually seek the front lines of battle, head to the battlements, once he's found Ulf, start swinging his sword, I think that's stupid. I think that's out of keeping with the character, and it makes his death feel too convenient. It would have been very easy to me for him to have stuck to a nearby command center, again, once he's found Ulf, trying to give orders, and then Dustin's forces push him out of the comfort of that command center. He's caught in flight and stands and bravely fights, and then we get the exact same outcome. I think that would have been fine, because once you get past the initial thing of like, it seems moronic that a guy who's like Ormond's not a secret genius or anything, but he clearly has a certain low cunning. I just don't see this guy risking himself in hand-to-hand combat, especially when he knows there's all the, blood and everything associated with it. But everything that follows from that is excellent. I love it all. I love, like, Roderick Dustin really feels like the minor character who steals this whole episode, and it's just going to be emblazoned in my mind the way that Ormond gets his colossal villainous breakdown when Ulf is flying in to burn them both, as Roderick's just like, hell yeah, we get to have the coolest death ever. I love that. 2 things then branch off of Ormond for me. The first is that Gwaine, through this, the latter half of the season, is set up as the guy coming in and saying, oh my god, Ormond is the worst, get us away from this guy, do something different. And look, it's a good effort for him to abduct Corlys and try to use him to kickstart a peace deal between the Green faction and the Black faction. And, I think obviously Gwaine's peace deal is a non-starter, but what are you going to do, right? Gwaine's not a diplomat, and he's trying to come up with something that can possibly deal with the avarice of the other Hightower, really. But, the peace deal that Corlys then innovates from there is actually a pretty good one. It's pretty agreeable. I think another person in Daemon's shoes could end up signing up to that deal. The problem, of course, is that Gwaine doesn't realize until it's too late that Daemon just is Rhaenyra's own Ormond. He is the fanatic on the other side who has been giving the similar speeches about how we are the master race and we must not only have victory, have control, we must actually exterminate the enemies that are in front of us to demonstrate all of the stuff that we get personally worked up around. So I think all of that works really well for me. Taking a step back just from the main villain into the big picture of this episode, I think Ormond is critical to the slightly surreal tone, actually, I would say, of this episode, where you have stuff like literal child soldiers clinging to little shields and sticks being put up on the walls, and there are so many contexts where that would just be too cloying and too ridiculous of a villainous thing to do, but it fits perfectly with how Ormond has been presented to us as there's nothing that's too low for him. He is this very petty, pathetic figure in the final analysis. He has all these warped judgments of the world around him that lead him to, he's putting those children up there because he thinks Rhaenyra is too squeamish to possibly burn her way in. And Daemon's just like, okay, I'm just going to burn down the gate anyway. And if a couple kids get burnt, they're like, oh, it's on them for not moving. And then past that, we can still storm the town. Which I really love how the town's defenses do feel set up in a way that feels like, okay, they actually prepared for this. They actually came up with everything they could. There are none of these defenses individually win the battle for the Greens, nothing does, but these are good stopgaps to slow them down so that Ulf can wreak havoc. It's just the Ulf part of the plan that goes so wrong. And so it's that combination to me of Ormond being so out there as a villain, and then also just the dragons having such a distorting effect on everything around them, that I think really lends itself to this being not like so much of Game of Thrones was billed as it's really gritty fantasy and realistic to what actually happens in wars. And this feels like it's letting itself be a little more fantastical in a way that's really good to me. Related to that, I think that this is a super funny episode too. I've already been talking about this season being maybe the funniest season of any Westeros show. This might be the funniest episode of any of them. It's like a competition between Roderick Dustin and Aegon Targaryen for who can have the better one-liners. And it's this fascinating thing to me that House of the Dragon over its course has evolved, because it was not like this at the start, in the first few episodes of the first season, where it had a very clear, very good vision for what it was going to be. But it's slowly warped into the strange black comedy it's not as staged and set up around its jokes as something like Succession or whatever, which is, also nominally about a succession crisis, but obviously they're much more to create entire funny scenarios. But I think this is a show that actually has the ability to regularly comment on how absurd the situations are that its characters are getting into, that Aegon is not just playing his resurrection straight, but he almost feels like Heath Ledger's Joker at times, that Ulf is... the entire crux of this episode is that when the big day we've been building up to the entire season comes along, when there's going to be all this fighting and hundreds and thousands of people are going to die, which, Game of Thrones could have built as such a huge and, an action set piece that's really cool and really dark and really how is anyone going to survive this, that it's not only presented as a cool action sequence that you can see how people would see, like Roderick Dustin would see the glory in being part of something this awesome where you want to see the thing that happens next, that it's also this horrifically tragic, unpleasant thing at the same time with the kids peeing themselves with fear on the walls and Roderick Dustin just casually murdering one of them, and the awfulness of it all. And then in the middle of it all, Ulf, the guy that everything hinges on, has just passed out drunk. And that's what changes the entire tide of Westerosi history, is that he just had a few too many beers the night before because he got, a little too into his ego. That's incredible to me. I think that this is the episode to me that demonstrates, for all the deviations from the book that I have not read, and all the arguments back and forth online about this, including with Martin himself blogging posts that I have not read, although I did see a screenshot just the other day of him talking about Helena's death, so thanks for that spoiler, George. I guess I caught up on that at just the wrong time. I think that this is very true to Martin. It reminds me a lot of his books, and particularly, I had this, I don't remember if I talked about it in a previous episode of this, but I had a long yarn to a friend at work the other day about how much the show seems to be drawing from the Feast for Crows in general, which is the least popular Song of Ice and Fire book, and for me personally, it's my second favorite after Storm. And so much of that book just hinges around the idea of war as not how it's sold as a cool action thing, but as this fundamentally destructive, corrosive force. And I think that's so here in full force throughout this episode in a way that's so haunting and so beautiful. You don't just have Gwaine as the knight in shining armor who's trying to create peace when everyone else is hell-bent on chaos. Oh, and it's worth mentioning, Ormond's dead. Gwaine is now Lord Hightower. He is now very important. Whatever move he does next, now I don't even know if Daeron's alive or not, but whatever move he does next, whether he decides to reach that peace deal, or now that he's learnt that Aegon is still alive, that they still have a chance, he makes a move. I don't know. You can see how easily you can get sucked back into the Game of Thrones, into the interest of all the power politics and who's got the upper hand at a particular time. But there's not only Gwaine on the side of the Angels in this episode, there's the fact that Corlys comes around to making a peace deal, even though his faction has the upper hand in this situation, because he has had his arc over this season of learning, you win the battle and Driftmark still burns. You can kill however many pirates and it won't heal your family. That kind of peace above war kind of message. And Daemon seems to have been transformed by the outcome of the battle, seeing he could have averted all this. He decided that this kind of blood and fire was going to come to the city, even though he personally chose not to unleash his dragon on the city because he let slip the dogs of war, events occurred that were out of his control, and he has to take responsibility for that fact that this was avoidable. So I'm fascinated now to see Daemon, who is a character I've always written off as like he's fun to watch, but he's just super giga evil, and like he's never going to be redeemable, but I'm curious to see if in the 4th season he can actually stop being the devil on Rhaenyra's shoulder and start to become something of a force for, if not full-blown peace, because he's still loyal to Rhaenyra and she's still going to want war. You know, trying to tame the conflict, trying to limit its flames after it's kind of built up and up for so long, and the people have not been able to hold it back. Of course, the interesting thing now is that the Black faction are in such a commanding position in the war where they've annihilated the remaining Green Army. And yet there's the narrative of Aegon's resurrection, because of course, if Aegon had just been thought, missing and hiding, it wouldn't be a huge deal for him to return. But because Sunfire really did resurrect, Aegon's return, even though he's 100% alive the whole time, is being interpreted as this fascinating religious resurrection. That's really cool. So there's that narrative, the word of great lords rising in his support. The Westerlands will no doubt be putting together another army, and I imagine the Stormlands will probably be rising in support of him as well. The Greens are in an interesting position now going forwards, where the Black faction really won this battle and may have lost the war here today with a combination of all the ructions that are occurring in their own side with Ulf, and then with the Adam Allen kind of diverging on their paths, with whatever Hugh is going to do from here. And of course, what's happening back in King's Landing with, Rhaenyra literally murdered the High Septon. It's not going to go well from there. Sadly, speaking of King's Landing, I do think that my Velaryon disguise plot is just fully dead now. Otherwise, they would have made a move while they still had the chance. Who knows what Bold John Roxon is going to do now? Maybe he got buried, but I was pretty sure watching things he just got separated from Daemon, so I'm really hoping he is still around, because it will be really interesting to see that kind of character who is stereotypically built up as just the heavy for one of the good guys to have a fight with, as the right-hand man while other plot stuff is happening to defeat them in the finale. Really interesting to see what happens when their smart boss dies and they're still going on. Regardless of the Velaryon plot failing, I think the capital's position is now obviously still in serious jeopardy. I think basically everybody has lost confidence in Rhaenyra making good decisions at this point, and I think there's now all these characters in the capital, Baela, Rhaena, Mysaria, who could have been so tightly bound to Rhaenyra, serving her with all of their incredible talents, who she is now completely alienated. There are people you can look at, like Ulf, Hugh, Adam, who you could list as, okay, I could see these people defecting to the other side or whatever. But with people like Rhaena, Baela, maybe Mysaria would defect, but what would Baela and Rhaena do from here? I'm not sure, but it's such a shame that they've been divided from their own... Is she their aunt and mother-in-law? No, oh god, it gets complicated. I'm not getting into all that. 2 concluding thoughts for me. Number 1, I think it is so cool that Little Prince Joffrey does not get to speak for the entire season. We do not see Rhaenyra speaking to him, and when we finally see that conversation happening, it's all about Rhaenyra's narrative of this is the obligation we have, and it's delivered in this way that's completely disconnected from him personally. Like, he's too young to absorb this. He doesn't get it. It's all really about her own narrative of justification and importance being laid onto him, when he just needs comforting about his older brother has died, his mum is sitting on the iron, it's all just scary and confusing, and how's he gonna get any of this? And she's just completely personally disconnected from him, like she has from literally everybody else except maybe Daemon and maybe whatever the name of her assistant is. On the flip side, for the intensely human, I think it's so incredible that Ulf, who is the resident comic relief character, has in a show where its serious elements have increasingly had comic underpinnings become the dead serious center of this final episode, where he's still very funny, but ultimately they actually managed to make his internal conflict and how he's treated as just a random base-born guy into the pivot that everything on this final episode is timed around and paced around and hinges on, that he gets to be the one to deliver the coup de grace to the villain. I think that's a real triumph for the show and for what we're trying to do with George's writing, and in particular, of course, with the inspiration of A Feast for Crows. So all in all, for me, it's a 9 out of 10 finale. There's hardly anything I change about it. it. None of my issues have a big impact on my enjoyment of it. I think it's not only a great episode of TV, I think the fact that basically every single significant character comes out of this finale altered as a person with big questions about their trajectory from here that you could discuss for hours, I think that demonstrates that this was a truly great finale to a fun season of television. And of course, celebrating the end of the season, I'd be remiss not to mention that now, with crossing off Backstabbed, I have achieved not only double bingo, but triple bingo. Woohoo!